Hi, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're just going to get right into it. Welcome. Thanks for coming out to hear me talk. I hope that what I have to offer today is interesting, as I say in my videos, interesting, educational, and informative, and entertaining, hopefully, that too. We don't have any announcements or anything, so I'm just going to get right into it. So this talk is about something that I have discussed in the past in terms of some of what we'll go over, but I'm presenting something new tonight that is my own creation, and so I'm a little nervous about that. But from the use that I've had of this and the interactions that I've had with people and explaining it, it seems to be very useful and workable for people in terms of a way of what I'm trying to do is help people connect, and in a very disconnected world right now. And that's kind of where I come from, right? Is my goal is I like people getting along, and we're having a real hard time with that. And there are a lot of reasons for that, which we can validly point to. It would take all night to go over all of it if we went to the social level and social media and the ideological stuff and the government and the this and the that. But this is what, I'm a psych guy, and so I talk from a perspective of psychology mostly. And so that's kind of how I'm more of a one-on-one person when it comes to how I think about how we deal with things. Right, there are group solutions and things that can be done at a group level, even at a national level, that would make a huge difference. And unfortunately, the folks in charge right now don't think that way, and so, you know, we're going to have to get some new ones. But until then, regardless of what folks elsewhere are doing, we have our lives to deal with, and our friendships and our relationships and frenemies and enemies and all of that. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to, that's the level I'm kind of trying to talk at. Thank you for that. Okay, so first I thought I might, there we go, it works. Okay, so let me give you guys a little bit of background if you don't know much about me personally, just so I can kind of introduce myself to you. My name is Chris Shelton, and I am a former cult member. I grew up in a family where my folks had gotten involved with the Church of Scientology when I was very, very young, about 3 or 4 years old. And so I grew up in a cult, and that makes for an interesting life. And not only did I grow up in it, I also went to public school, had a fairly normal-looking life, and grew up in California. And when I went to high school is when my parents, my dad, kind of suggested, hey, why don't you go really check it out? And so rather than, you know, because it was kind of a thing of go to church sort of thing or do the church stuff, but it wasn't the thing in my life. We were now living in Santa Barbara, California. I was 15 years old. I went down to the church. I had not a critical thinking bone in my body, and I was, you know, sold right away. They reeled me right in, as they do, and we're going to talk tonight about how they do that. And I was absolutely convinced that this was a really, really good thing. And right out of high school, I joined staff and worked for the Church of Scientology, and I did that in Santa Barbara for 8 years. Then, at 25 years old, I doubled down because we weren't taking over the world and it wasn't happening fast enough. So I doubled down, signed the billion-year contract, and moved to Los Angeles and joined the Sea organization. And that's a paramilitary outfit run by the Church of Scientology. It is basically the core of Scientology, you could say. And it's in the same way that maybe the Vatican is the core of the Catholic Church. The Sea Org is the core of Scientology. 24/7, hardcore, all you do is work, and work, and work, and work for Scientology. So I did that for another 17 years. And so it was 25 years total. really hardcore, very dedicated. I worked at the blue buildings, that building there that says Scientology. That's literally the building I lived in for all that time. And I had a lot of adventures and a lot of ups and downs and a lot of nonsense and a lot of physical and emotional and psychological trauma and abuse in that group. No joke, I was beat up on and all kinds of other stuff. There's sleep deprivation, all of it. And I've talked about that. And if you really want to know about Scientology, I've written a book about it, so you can check that out. But tonight we're not talking just about Scientology, but that's kind of my origin story, is that that's where I grew up and where I worked for 25 years. I escaped in 2012, 2013, and got out. And I got myself out through some good critical thinking, if I say so myself. It started with debunking some conspiracy theories and then going from there, because Scientology is pretty hardcore on their conspiracy theories, by the way. 9/11 truthers, all that kind of stuff, like deep stuff. So I was pretty hardcore in the conspiracy world too. So, I realized one day that I was telling more lies than I was telling truth to people, and my moral base doesn't include that it's okay to lie to people. But I was doing it kind of unknowingly for a very long time, and then once I realized, once you see it, you can't unsee it, you know? And that was the final nail. There had been a lot of abuses and a lot of nonsense in the church, but it was really that moral dilemma that kind of snapped me out of working for the group. So, and we'll get back to that moral stuff in a little bit. So I left, and thankfully in 2013, getting on the internet, not only deconstructing Scientology, but asking the question, how do I make sure this never happens to me again? And that's when I discovered skepticism and critical thinking, and James Randi, and skeptics.com, and Michael Shermer, and this whole world, Penn and Teller, right? I didn't know any of that stuff. I'd been in a cult. So none of that stuff was stuff we were watching or paying attention, certainly not James Randi. So I didn't know about any of that. And one of the things about cults is they load the language. So the word critical was a bad word in Scientology. If you're critical, if you're a critical thinker, you're an asshole. So you don't want to have any of that, pardon my French. So you don't want to, there may be more of that. So you don't want to be critical, right? So this was a whole mind adjustment for me. And that's just one part of what was a lot of adjustments that I ended up making over the first many years of leaving Scientology. And I didn't leave passively. I'm a pretty communicative guy, and I really don't like people being screwed over. So I didn't sit around and think about my cult experience. I jumped into the public forum and I started talking and speaking out pretty quick. I was declared a suppressive person by Scientology by the end of 2013, and I was on their enemies list. Yay. And, and I haven't, thankfully, had the kind of attention from them that, say, Leah Remini has had, or, some of their major critics. They don't go through my garbage as far as I know. But they did offer to buy my YouTube channel one time and things like that. They do want me quiet. So I've been kind of pushing back against Scientology. But the reason I bring all of this up is because when I got out of Scientology in 2013, I had a very, very, very important question burning in my mind that didn't get satisfied for a number of years. And that question was, what the hell happened to me? What was that? What did they do, and how did they do it? This is like, what? Because when you go down the rabbit hole of Scientology, and I'm sure some of you have, you don't just run into Xenu. I mean, you run into this L. Ron Hubbard guy, and you run into these, all the Sea Org and the stuff, and the E-meter, and all this, like, what is this? Well, it was my whole world for decades. And to me, it was very important. And I thought all of that stuff was the stuff of saving the world. And I was on board with that mission. I was a true believer in every sense. So I needed to understand what was that all about? And how do they get people into that mindset anyway? I would have taken a bullet for David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology. No question about it, I would have done that. You know, now, of course, I'd, oh, gee, it's shame he got shot there. So, you know, I have a little bit of a different attitude now. So, so that question, what happened to me, evolved into what happens to cult members, what happens to Scientologists, what happens to cult members. And as I grew and learned and walked down this path that I call cult recovery, that question was, more and more avenues presented themselves to me of how to answer that question of what happened to me. I started a YouTube channel, and being the talky guy that I am, I just started talking to a lot of people, psychologists and sociologists and neuroscientists and ex-cult members from other groups, as well as ex-Scientologists. I just brought everybody in, and I wanted to really get my head around this. And so I thought at the beginning that critical thinking was the thing. I very, very, very closely identified with critical thinking. I even called myself, you know, a critical thinker and put myself out there as that, right? Not because I was trying to put myself on a pedestal, but because I was trying to communicate to people that critical thinking is an ongoing process, and you learn, and it's a discipline, and it's like martial arts. You just keep practicing it. And that will be how you develop critical thinking. And by doing that, you will develop the skill set to never, ever, ever fall for anybody's bullshit ever again, right? Real easy, right? You just know the logical fallacies, and you learn a little bit about how to argue with people, and you learn a little bit about logic, and you're set, right? Well, you know, it took me a few years to realize, no, you're not set. And I really, really, really was disappointed by that, because I really, really like critical thinking, and I like one-stop solutions, and I thought these two things would go together really well. And I talked and talked and talked about critical thinking and educated people about it on my channel, and I worked with people one-on-one this way until I realized, oh, yeah, no, there's other things that get in the way of critical thinking. And it was kind of clicking into and going very, very deep into explaining Scientology's emotional manipulation system, where I had to learn about emotions and the psychology of emotions, which tie right in with the psychology of personality and identity. These things are very, very closely related. And that became a very interesting path to walk down and read about and learn about, because when you start diving into the subject of human emotion, well, I found a paper from 1982, I think it was, that only had like 80 definitions of the word emotion. What's an emotion, right? What's emotion? What is this anyway? Well, we all know what it is because we've experienced them every minute of every day of our lives. But trying to get a solid definition of it, you learn very quickly that there isn't such a thing as settled science when it comes to this. Okay, fine, so there isn't. But we still have emotions, and we can still understand them and be intelligent about them. And so we have this thing called emotional intelligence. And this path of what happened to me was deconstructed to a point with critical thinking, and how logical fallacies could be used to manipulate people. You leave out some information, you curve some facts, you present information in a particular way, and you can get people to buy into almost anything you want to sell them. Logical fallacies, that's where we fall down in our thinking. But that's really only at the surface of what we're doing, and there's this whole emotional thing. And the more I learned about that, the more clear it became how much of our life is centered around and focused by our emotions and our emotional life. And so it became undeniable that I had to learn something about that. All of this was actually in service of deconstructing Scientology. And it was really, really interesting, because there's I don't know if you probably don't know this, but in the subject of Scientology, there is a whole huge book and charts and practical exercises you do all around emotion. And Hubbard actually lists out, L. Ron Hubbard, the guy who started Scientology, lists out all the emotions, or a bunch of them. He doesn't list them all out because you can't really, there's too many of them. But he's got it all on a scale, and he numerically judges them. This emotion is higher on the scale than this one, so it's better. It's better to be bored than angry. It's better to be in grief than to be in apathy. This is all scaled out. So for decades, I thought this is how people thought and reacted and worked emotionally. So deconstructing all of that, because it's not how people work at all, was another big leap forward in the education. And that's where it became clear that human behavior and understanding human behavior is a multidisciplinary approach. There's psychology, there's sociology, there's neuroscience. These three things all connect in figuring out how we are. But you wouldn't know that talking to academics and professionals, because generally they silo very hard on their area and think it explains everything. And, you know, yeah, what about this or what about this? And I'm not trying to put down a bunch of academics. I'm just saying that I run into this. And it's been hard to integrate these ideas across these different fields, you know, in a way that people will accept, at least in academia. So, but I have to throw it out there because my solution to all of this, or what I put together here, is very multidisciplinary. So that's kind of my background in this, because once I figured out what happened to me, and it took about 8 years to get it all straight. I have a YouTube channel. I work on this all day. This is my job, is figuring this stuff out and talking about it and working with people. And I don't just do figure out stuff. I consult with people and work with them one-on-one, and I've done some cult interventions where we go actually get somebody out of a cult, stuff like that. I've done some of that work. It's really fun, and it's very stressful, but it's kind of fun. And I've worked with a lot of people post-cult, or worked with family and friends of people who are in a cult to help them to get their family or friends out. I've done a lot of that, probably over 100 cases of helping people in one way or another with that kind of stuff. Yes? Absolutely. A cult is so simple definition is a cult is basically any group of human beings where a codependent relationship of an abusive nature develops between the leadership and the followers. I understand, and I have a bit of a different view about that. There are other characteristics we could talk about, us versus them, the sort of we're the source of knowledge and truth and authority, extreme ends of belief, all fits into that. And so I'm aware of religious groups of many stripes all over that don't do those things and are just collective social groups that people get together, have beliefs, share them. I can't call that a cult. When they take those beliefs or activities to a level of abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse, that's when we're crossing lines. And so it becomes one of the things that I, by necessity, had to learn and speak to often is context is king. Context always, the very broad rules fall apart really fast with this kind of thing, especially when you're talking about religion. Yeah, absolutely. So the Moonies, the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, collectively as a group, that's a cult, right? What's that? Yeah, that's where I go no, because that's an ideological position rather than a cultic group. There is no leader figure that tells everybody and they all march in lockstep to that, right? Okay. Totally fine. You can do that. So that's my take on a cult. Okay. Okay, so where I was in this is that it goes from trying to figure out what happened to me in a cult to trying to figure out why people act the way they do. And that's a big-ass question. That's like, wow, okay, Chris, let's spend the rest of my life doing this. Okay, let's do it, right? Let's figure this out. Let's see what it is that drives people. And that's where this comes from. So what am I talking about? Basically, there are three things about our psychology. This is the beginning of presenting this sort of model to you. It's a very simple model, so don't worry about it. This isn't going to be complicated, and you're not going to have to learn a ton of stuff, and there's no weird language with any of this. The three things about our psychology, when you start thinking about mental processes or things that go on in our head and in our body, because it is a whole body experience. It's not just something that goes on in your brain. You have a whole gut biome, and you have a whole nervous system down here that actually mirrors or is as complicated as the stuff that's going on up here. And your whole body is involved in your emotions. One of my attempted wittier definitions for emotion is, a thought that your whole body feels. It's not just something that happens up here. So in our psychology, we think or reason. We have cognitive functions, right? We reason things out, compute problems, solve problems, stuff like that. We feel emotions. So we think and we feel. These I separate. And we know. We have certainty. When I use the word know here, I'm talking about I know it's true. That kind of knowing. The certainty. And people think certainty is a product of this. But it's not. It's a product of this. And it's a product of another layer that operates below that. And that layer is our morality. So what cults teach us about ourselves, right? This is kind of how I got into this, so I figured this is how I would present it. People are fascinated by the outliers in our society because they want to understand these things better, and because they're probably at least a little afraid that they may be just like those aberrant elements in our society, right? There is some fear in all of us about, am I like that? Am I not? And so we're endlessly fascinated by these things. And it is absolutely, in the time that I've gotten out of Scientology and started talking about this stuff, cults have become a niche part of the true crime genre. And as far as I can tell, it's permanently there now, And I even got to help out on some of those documentaries and stuff, too, so that was kind of fun. I'm very happy that it is in the public awareness the way that it is, because this is how you create change at a big, big level. It takes time and awareness, and we're getting that with cults now. 20, 30 years ago, people were not as tuned into it as they are now. And on the subject of, while they misuse the word narcissism all the time, at least people are aware of it. And they're aware of the concept of a human predator, cult leader, things like that. This is a raised awareness that is good. So cult thinking is based in certainty more than facts or evidence. And it's very, 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 very common for just about anybody to do this in some part of their life or with some part of their thinking. It's not just in religion. Cults are not just religious in nature. We can look to NXIVM, which was the Keith Raniere thing. That was not religious at all. You can look at a company, look in history, you can look at a company like Enron. Totally run at the C-suite level as a cult. But it wasn't religious. There was absolutely nothing religious about it. People make connections to religion with certain things in order to try to talk about how when people go too extreme. It's like a religion, because it's the only thing they can think of where people go that extreme. But they go that extreme in sports. They go that extreme in entertainment. They go that extreme in their business life all the time. And cult-like dynamics can happen in any human group. Any group, a sewing circle, a sports club. I've seen an acting class turn into a cult. A martial arts dojo, you'd be surprised how many of those places get a little culty. Because you imbue that much power in somebody who maybe isn't quite prepared to or educated in how to deal with it, and they start doing weird stuff with that power, you know? Did you?
Do you ever see that happening with a group like the Secular Hub? Are we motivated by it? Do we have, you know, an understanding of the outside world that's, you know, more vast than simply our little mirror?
I have not found this group to be culty. Let me put it that way. That's why I'm still here. No, this is a pretty self-aware group, and well, we're going to talk about why things go off the rails. So, okay. Also, you can have, we don't fall into bad beliefs because we're weak or stupid. We fall in because we're human, right? You really, yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, do you think that the cult leaders, do they not have the same morality as you? Like, do they think that they're the heroes of their own story, or do they accept that they're, like, bad and they're just okay with it?
No, they are the heroes of their own story. Most every human being is. Yeah, and we'll cover that. I'll tell you what. Let me go ahead and get through this, and then we'll get to the questions, okay? Okay, good. So, we don't fall into cults, we don't fall into bad beliefs because we're weak or stupid, right? This is a very important point. I run into this over and over again. It's the snap judgment of people to reject other human beings because they have a disagreement with them and immediately question their intelligence. And we'll talk about today kind of why that's a very foolish thing to do. But I can tell you from over a decade of experience now in the ex-cult world that it is smart people who get wrangled into cults, not stupid people. That's how it actually works. And the smarter you are, I'm sorry, but the more vulnerable you are to this because of the way our thinking processes work. You're faster and more facile, you could say, at rationalizing your cult involvement when you're a smarter person. And that's kind of my short answer as to why that happens. So we have core human basics to talk about real fast, right? Tribalism, confirmation bias, and emotional needs. These are not weaknesses. They're just things we do. Our psychology evolved for survival in small tribes. Loyalty, conformity, and shared belief systems kept us alive. It's how we form groups. So you can't imagine a world that's not going to have culty behavior in it because you can't educate somebody out of natural human processes and how we connect any more than you can educate somebody out of eating. There's just needs and there's things that we do. So it's really more a matter of looking at it as a sort of a coin where you have one side where we have good groups and then we have the other side where things get a little bad, right? And maybe not so good, maybe a little evil. That's the opposite side. It's kind of like we're always going to have conspiracy theories and nonsensical ideas because those products of imagination and social forces are always going to be there because we have imagination and we have social forces, right? And we have to have these things to get along as a human in a human experience. So that's why we're always going to have these things. But it's important that we understand them and we understand ourselves so we can deal with them appropriately and not fall prey to our own confirmation bias or our own tribalism, which we all have. We all carry it around with us. And, of course, emotional needs. Again, not a weakness. It's just part of who we are. So this is right here, my model. This is the REM model. It's very simple. It's a 3-layer model that is built over the idea of core consciousness. If you strip away all the reasoning powers and faculties you have, all the emotions that you've got going on, both in the moment and emotional needs, and you strip away morality, what's left? Pretty much an awareness of being alive, core consciousness, right? Very, very, very basic level life stuff. But these are the things that make life interesting. And these are broad categories, and I'm throwing a lot of stuff into these categories. As my model, I get to do that. So these are, I'm not pretending to have solved morality. I'm saying that morality is a layer in our personality or our identity or our mental processes that is an important part of what makes us who we are. And our emotional layer sits right on top of that moral layer, which means if you have you as the little tiny you, over that identity or over that is your moral layer. It's very basic. It's right up against who you see yourself as. The emotions go on top of that, and then your thinking goes on top of that. And as you're sort of going up to the top here, you're coming out to the world and your interactions with it. So we're interacting with the world mostly here, but these things are constantly going on underneath this and messing with it. And we'll go into a lot more detail about that. So that's basically the way the model is sort of put together. So let's break down each layer. So the reason layer, anything, everything having to do with your cognitive functions, processes, computations, calculations, thinking, all of it is in this layer, right? You can just take all that stuff and throw it in there. So critical thinking, problem solving, calculating logical reasons to justify beliefs, opinions, and attitudes. Because there's the belief, and then there's the reasons you have the belief. And this layer is super busy all the time justifying your existence to you and to people around you. That's kind of what it exists for in a lot of ways. It's not about coming up with right answers. It's about coming up with answers that make sense to you, feel right to you, and will be acceptable to other people. They don't have to be true to meet those criteria. Just go talk to the flat earthers. Right? Like, you can base a lot of stuff on very, very false ideas. Objective truth doesn't have anything to do with how we do our calculations in terms of if it's not objectively true, somehow we can't think it. No, we can, and we do. It appears to us in our experience of life that this layer is where we live all the time. We're thinking, we have thousands of thoughts a day. It's very active. This is the layer that is most active on a day-to-day basis if you're a thinking person. And pretty much everybody is, even if they're sitting around meditating all day, they're still cogitating. I've done it. You're still cogitating, right, when you're sitting there quietly. So it appears to us in our experience of life as we talk to ourselves or have our inner dialogue that this layer is the thing that's deciding everything, because this is what we're most aware of. This layer is, as I call it, the spokesperson for us. It's how we represent ourselves to ourselves and to other people. So that's your reason layer. And all the critical thinking and all of the principles of, all of that, they all fit into there. So cults and other groups exploit our reason layer all the time against us. I've mentioned a few times already logical fallacies or throwing curves at you or not giving you all the data so you're not really making an informed decision but you kind of think you are. That's all messing with your reason layer. All of these things. Cherry-pick stories, right? We love our anecdotes. Oh, do we love our anecdotes, don't we, right? So if we hear a good one, we connect with it right away, and that's all how we mess with our reason layer. We're really good at lying to ourselves and accepting nonsense. So then there is the emotion layer, and we're going to spend some time on emotion and on the moral layer as well. This is obviously not all the emotions. This is just one representation. You can look up and find hundreds of lists and categorizations and books on emotions. I'm not pretending to present everything you ever needed to know about emotion. My model says, look, everything having to do with emotions, pack it in this part as separate from your thinking or your reasoning. There are two levels to this. There's two parts to how we experience emotion. We experience it in the moment, our emotional reactions. If I drop a hammer on my toe, not only will I experience pain, but I will experience a lot of emotion too, right in the moment. Anger, frustration, whatever, right? But under that is another layer having to do with our emotions, and that's emotional needs. And emotional needs comes out of Maslow's work. Other psychologists have done a lot of work on this. There are different models of emotional needs. I don't care really which one you use. The fact that you have them is what I'm trying to get across to people here, because I've run into so many people already. Emotional needs, what are those? I don't have that. What are you talking about? You know, they just have no self-awareness. Mostly men, by the way. So far, one for one, it's been men saying that. And emotional needs are actually, like, this is really the engine that's driving us. And if you imagine it as like a collection of buckets that you're constantly working on filling or emptying out, as the case may be if you have too much of something, we all have the same buckets, no matter what model you want to use. But how much we have to fill each of those buckets is highly individual to each person. Genetics, family, social dynamics, background, education, your whole life makes you who you are and determines where the levels of those emotional needs need to be for you. And it changes over time. It changes by context, by circumstance. Your emotional needs in one area of your life are different from the emotional needs in another area of your life. For example, work versus home. You don't barge into your boss's office demanding that he understand you while you have tears running down your face, but you might do that at home to your spouse, right? Like different emotional needs that we give ourselves in these different contexts, but we all have them. And it is our need to keep those buckets at a level that we feel for wherever we need to take it, so that we feel satisfied. This is where happiness comes from, but much more important is satisfied. Our needs have been fulfilled. What am I talking about? Security, stability, identity, meaning, purpose. Having a group, having a community, having friends. That's an emotional need. There are very few people, there are a couple, but there are very, very, very few human beings who have no need for sociality. Most of us crave it in one degree or another, but your needs might be different from yours, or from yours in terms of what's going to satisfy and how much is going to satisfy. We talk all the time about introverts and extroverts and how introverts need very little socialization in order to, they get overwhelmed by too much social, right? So that's a level that they need to reach. Whereas an extrovert feeds off of sociality and needs a lot more. So there's just one example of kind of what I'm talking about. Nobody convinces you to have these emotional needs. Nobody teaches you to have these things. This is not the product of indoctrination. It's who you are. And that's very important to understand, because most people don't get that. Again, they're thinking at the reason layer all the time. They have very good reasons for why they behave the way they do. But those reasons are really coming after the fact of, I have these emotional needs I need to fulfill. Imagine when you're hungry. like really hungry. You're out on the road, or you're at work, or you're doing something, and you're just, oh, I gotta get some food. That's a need. Nobody had to teach you to do that or feel that way. It's just how it just is happening, right? The emotional needs work exactly the same way. I'm lonely. I'm driven by loneliness is ruining my life, right? Well, you're just not getting your needs fulfilled when it comes to social, right? For example, or I'm adrift. I have no purpose. I don't know what to do with myself. Okay, we have an emotional need there. It will drive your behavior. It will drive you to do things. Yeah, a lonely college student joins a group that showers them with affection and affirmation, because we have needs for affection and affirmation. I don't know too many people who are literally islands. They're very few. So emotional actions, reactions, and emotional needs. And feelings drive reasoning. The deeper you go on the model, the more motivational these things become, right? The more driven we are by these things. So emotions obviously are manipulated all the time. There's whole textbooks on how to do this. There are a lot of books on this. There's Cialdini's Influence. There's every PR manual that is used on, what is it, K Street or whatever that PR stuff, right? Come on, Ruth, I know you know. I know you know. So we have emotions. We can love bomb people. Rituals that will create highs and lows, chanting, meditation, jumping up and down. We do these rituals in our secular life, not just in our religious life. You go to a concert, there's certain things you do, there's certain things you don't do, right? There's certain group stuff that people get into, the mosh pit, or the various things that people do, right? These are rituals. They're social rituals, and they can create emotional states. And when we are working collectively on these rituals, it creates a feeling that cannot be created when you're by yourself. I think you all know what I'm talking about, right? You've probably felt these things. That's emotion. That can be used in an emotionally manipulative way. I will invite you to go to any seminar by a guy named Grant Cardone, who is a Anthony Robbins type Scientology guy who sells inspiration. Go to a Tony Robbins thing, right? You might have heard of him. Any of these inspirational speakers are plucking your emotional strings, right? And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but at the same time, if you're not aware of what's going on, you could end up being manipulated into some pretty dark places. Fear and phobia induction is obviously emotional manipulation because you're literally creating fear in someone. Us versus them. Ugh. So easy to do. So easy. And America right now is completely overtaken by it. Actually, a great part of the world is. Shunning, silent treatment, right? This is emotional manipulation. The JWs, the Jehovah's Witnesses, actually use shunning as an act of love as far as they're concerned, as they think about it. They justify it at the rationalization layer by, but this is how I love you. Don't you understand? This is how the only way I can get you back into God's good grace, see, is to shun you and make life painful for you emotionally, and that's what will bring you back. So it's just blatant emotional manipulation on the part of the JWs in that particular case. Public humiliation and shaming also is part of this. In Scientology, conversely, when they shun you and disconnect you, they don't ever want to see you in. That is not an act of love when it's Scientology doing it to you, right? They are absolutely want to ruin, actually, right when in the materials of Scientology, it says, ruin them utterly. Just destroy those people, right? So, again, all in the direction of emotional manipulation. And then we come to the moral layer. And this is not just right, wrong, your rules. First, though, let me say that every single human being is walking around, as they say, I think as Walt Whitman said, we contain multitudes. I mean, we are complicated living beings. We are not simple creatures. And the moral layer is one of the more complicated things about us, because our morals, our list of what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, is complicated. Anybody, even the Christian fundies, who think it comes down to 10 commandments and that's all you need for morals, not even remotely close. Morals are something that we develop through social interaction and through social pressures, both from our family to start with and then on the playground. You learn very, very quickly on the playground what's right and wrong and what's good and bad and what you can get away with and what you can't, right? That's how we start developing that. But we end up, as adults, creating an incredibly rich inner tapestry, you could say, or mosaic of our moral life. And it really is the layer where, because it sits right on top of our identity and our core consciousness, morality is your lens of how the world makes sense. It's what you think of as a well-ordered world. This is how things are supposed to be. If you were to take a piece of paper and write down all the things that you think ought to be, this is how things should be. Rush Limbaugh wrote a whole book called, How Things Ought to Be. Basically a moral guide, right? Jordan Peterson with his 12 rules, right? These are moral principles. This is how things ought to be. This is what we all should be doing, or at least what I should be doing, because morals, engaged with self and with others. But it's that sense of order that I kind of want to communicate as a concept, because I don't want y'all thinking it's just, well, I don't think that you ought to be wearing plaid when you come into this place, Randy, and that's, all there is to morality. It's very, very highly developed in human beings. So all the social conventions, and if you were to be, I don't know, if you went to Japan, and were cross-cultural, then you would see right away, oh yeah, different context means different morals, different situations I'm in. There's behavior I can get away with at work that I can't get away with at home, and vice versa. There's ways to treat people. This is all your highly developed sense of your own morality. And that is, like I said, lives right over your conscious layer. So manners, etiquette, right, wrong, sense of order, how things ought to be, yeah, all those things. Okay, so that's your moral layer. And boy, is it powerful. I mentioned earlier moral dilemmas being a thing that gets people to snap out of cults, out of cult thinking. I found that to be true over and over again. I'm not going to stand here and say 100% of the time somebody needs to experience a moral dilemma in order to wake up from a cult, but it's a very powerful way of changing somebody.
Either good or bad, right?
That's right. In fact, I actually came up with a word. I don't talk about this a lot, but you know how you have epiphanies? Well, you could have a malephany too. Right? It's kind of a Breaking Bad kind of epiphany, right? It's like when you're doing bad things and you get away with it and you're like, oh, damn, I can get away with this? You've just had a malephany, right? Because now you're that much more immoral, right? And you got away with it, so, I'm gonna keep doing this. Okay, so anyway, so that's the moral stuff. And this manifests in a lot of different ways. You'll see or hear people talk about things right out of their moral layer all the time. If you're listening carefully, because, for example, people might talk about joining an ideological movement because freedom! That's a moral foundation for people. Liberty, freedom, right? This is a moral sense. There are emotional needs connected with freedom and with justice. A sense of reciprocity is an emotional need we have, but it lives much more firmly in the moral layer. These things cross over in some ways. And these layers are always talking to each other, by the way. This isn't like separate but, equal or something. These things are very, very integrated. Okay, so cults, for example, exploit morality. We are the chosen ones. We are special. We are superior. We're senior, right? So the emotional manipulation of us versus them eventually becomes moral manipulation. We are defending freedom or truth. Self-flagellation is the path to salvation, right? I must beat myself, whip myself, do these horrible things to myself, because that's what the moral, good, right thing to do is, right? The path of righteousness, obviously, is a moral path. And this symbol here, by the way, this is Gott mit uns. This is God's on our side. That was on the belt buckle of all the World War II soldiers fighting for Germany. Right? They were sure God was on their side. And when God's on your side, you're a pretty moral dude, right? Pretty righteous. God's on my side. There you go. So this whole thing gets manipulated, or there's a sort of a sequence of events that kind of roughly occurs that all of us are susceptible to, or vulnerable to, which is that we get our emotions hooked, then that frames the morality of the situation that we are finding ourselves in. Remember how context specific it is. And then once we've got the emotional connection and the moral agreement, at least, the reason layer goes into overdrive to justify this emotional connection, right? I needed Scientology to be true. It's going to sound stupid. And I'm going to sit here and say it anyway. Because when I was 15 years old, I needed a date. And I couldn't get one. Ever. It just didn't matter how I did it or who I asked or how I approached it. I wasn't getting any dates. And I felt emotionally devastated on a daily basis as a 15-year-old, nerdy kid that I couldn't do that. And I walk into the Church of Scientology one fine day and take their dumbass test and sit down with the evaluator, and she says, wow, it really looks like you have a hard time talking to people. Yeah, I'm a little shy, I read a lot of books. Boy, I bet you have a hard time getting dates. What? How did you know, right? Like, how could you possibly have known that about me? And I'm bonded right there on, oh, wait a minute, because the next line out of her mouth is, well, we have the exact course. And if you take it, oh, your problems are over. Shut up and take my money, right? Like, I couldn't connect fast enough. All my doubts, all my fears were gone immediately, right? No, it didn't work. It didn't work. But it took me 20 years to realize it didn't work. That's how much that emotional need connected on that day. This is the thing. This is what's going to solve my problem, my ruin, right? And I've talked to you guys, some of you before, about the Scientology ruin finding. That's the thing they do, is they're looking for the thing that's ruining your life. Well, you think it's a logical thing that's ruining your life? No, it's an emotional thing, right? And they want it, and they want you to tell them all about it. And you trust, and you put your faith in this person because they look like they know what they're talking about, and you connect with them emotionally. Easy sale. Shut up and take my money, right? You can't sign up fast enough. It's the emotional connection. They didn't logic me into being a Scientologist, right? There was no argumentation convincing me of the power of engrams and body thetans. Nobody brought any of that up. It was, you want a date? Yeah, I do. Good. Come take this class. Okay, I will. That's how manipulation usually looks. There was nothing unusual about what happened to me that day. But this cycle is kind of how it works, right? This is played with, and this runs to catch up. And our experience of our life is we're living in this layer most of the time. We're aware of this most of the time. So we're not thinking too much about this, and we're definitely not thinking about this. This is feelings. And people do not question their feelings. They question your facts. They question their facts way before they question their feelings. And they will not. The whole point about the moral layer is those are the things they won't question. Those are their guiding principles. That's how things are supposed to be, right? So that's how that whole model is sort of messed with. So we have a couple examples I can give you real fast. Yeah, I'm going to try to hurry up because I wanted to try to fit all this into an hour. Okay, so social groups, right? Like you could be in a book club, and then one fine day, the head of the book club gets hold of this new book on New Age thinking and how it's going to revolutionize her whole life and reorganize her entire, emotional strata, and it's just amazing. And all of you guys in the book club need to read this right now because it's just going to change your life. And we start down a path of emotional commitment to a thing. And this is how dogmas develop. And so even in a book club, you get somebody really hooked up on something, and then they start making demands because their emotional needs are so fulfilled by this that they just know they're going to fulfill yours too. And so the social pressures start going into place. And depending on the dynamics of the group, that book club leader could end up kind of culty. A little bit of this book is the truth. Don't you get it? Kind of approach. And we don't like it. But when we're caught up in it, and this is my friend, and this is my friend, but I work with this person, suddenly there's all these obligations connected with this. It's not just a simple idea you can just reject. There's all this other stuff going on. So you kind of feel a little stuck in it, What's trapping you? Emotions, morals, businesses. This is, of course, we talked about, wealth, being your own boss, multi-level marketing schemes. You guys ever connected up with, Amway or any of that stuff? Oh, my God. You dodged a bullet. It's really bad. It's really culty stuff. The thing that really bums me about multi-level marketing is how few people who get involved in the cult system of multi-level marketing get ejected out of that system eventually or eject themselves out of it because they're broke, bankrupt, destroyed their social networks. And then it doesn't even occur to them that what they just experienced was a little culty. That word never comes into the conversation. It was a business opportunity, and I didn't do it right. I didn't fulfill it. I failed. All of those are reasons that the MLM actually gave the person. Right? So there's reason and manipulation there, but there's also emotional. And of course, how do we talk about this without talking about politics? A lot of my viewers wish I wouldn't. It's a very, very contentious issue. But I think amongst us girls, I can say that politics gets a little culty, right? I think I can say that. Get away with it here, right? I couldn't get away with that in the GOP. At the local GOP meeting, they would definitely want to strangle me for saying that. But it's true. And of course, in the propaganda and the sort of emotional manipulation that occurs at the ideological level is we are true patriots. The election was stolen, right? All these lines, these thought-stopping cliches that come out, all in service of fulfilling those emotional needs that people have. We get very frustrated listening to people tell us why they follow or believe things. And one of the points I'm trying to make tonight is we spend way too much time listening to those rationalizations and not realizing that the thing that's actually sticking these people to that belief set are their emotional needs and their moral foundations. They're not connecting on the ideas. The ideas are just a way of, that's just what they tell you. Maybe that's what they tell themselves. But it's what they're feeling that is actually driving the behavior. And I say this to you because I really want y'all to know the stuff they tell you is almost meaningless. It's not totally meaningless. It's a clue as to where the emotions are that are driving what's really going on. And that's how you should think about conversation with people that you strongly disagree with, is what is it that they're telling me right now that leads me down to the emotional layer and the moral layer, because that's where the decision making is actually happening. And I can sit here and throw a fact and another piece of evidence and a whole nother video and a whole catalog of YouTube videos at this person, and none of it touches them because you're not addressing the underlying emotional needs and moral foundations that are actually driving the behavior. We've talked a bit about logical fallacies in the past and good critical thinking and how you can argue with people, but this bypasses a lot of that on purpose, right? Because you'll spend hours arguing with people and get nowhere. You've probably done it. And very frustrating. Well, you're not getting to the real reasons. Yeah, so you can break free with it. Because it's a model of human behavior, it fits the positive end of this too. It doesn't just explain why people are all screwed up. It also gives you a path of how to get them unscrewed up. And when I talk about screwed up, I'm talking about like maybe somebody who came out of a cult. That's somebody I can attest who's got some issues. And they got some things to sort out. And often, not knowing these things, ex-cult members might say something like I said in the first year I was out. Hey, listen, if I'm still talking about this Scientology crap a year from now, just shut me up. Just shut me down. Because a year should be plenty of time for me to get over this, right? It took me 8 years to figure out what the hell happened to me in that cult. And yeah, that was a long time. There was a lot of work in that. People who come out of a cult are not necessarily any more self-aware than when they were in. This is where education really comes into play. But education not only in critical thinking, but in emotional intelligence and even moral foundations. Okay, so in recovery, for example, we teach critical thinking, spotting distortions, psychoeducation. How do you work? How do you think? What is you? How do you see yourself? How do you mentally, what's going on? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about cognitive dissonance. Let's talk about motivated reasoning. Let's talk about these reason layer things that go on with us. And I have a deck of cards that have all the logical fallacies on it. Let's play with these every day, right? Let's figure this stuff out so that we do think better and understand our cognitive functions better. That's part of psychoeducation. Learning about emotional intelligence, learning about emotional manipulation, learning about reason layer stuff. This is all really, really, really key to a recovery for an ex-cult member or an ex-MLMer, you know, or an ex-Trumper. Emotions are addressed on this recovery path, or the emotional layer is addressed by addressing trauma, which is all throughout your body, right? Body keeps the score. Trauma is amazing stuff to learn about. And it's not as obvious or self-defining as it might appear on the surface. There are things to learn about trauma. Establishing boundaries is usually something absolutely crucial to teach people coming out of a cult. But actually, it's something kind of crucial to teach all of us. Right? What are healthy boundaries? What's the push-pull on this? Where's the lines in the sand? For you, for other people? How do we find compromise? How do we find that place? between us and other individuals. This is something well worth our time to learn about and think about for a bit, right? So that we have sensible answers when people ask us about stuff like this. What are your boundaries? Randy, what are they? Yeah, I know. Every time. Okay. Rebuild safe relationships. That's really key, because the one thing that you get in ex-cult members, for example, is pretty twisted ideas of how relationships are supposed to work. Their power dynamics are all out of sorts, for example, right? When you come out of a group where an individual or a small core of people are literally the source of truth, right, which we see in MAGA, for example. We're living in a post-truth world right now. Truth itself is optional. Truth is questionable. Does truth even exist? That's the result of decades of propagandized work on boundaries and on how we get along and stuff like that, right? It's important stuff. And of course, learning, regulation, self-regulation, and resilience. See, I point all these things out to y'all. I know I'm talking about cult stuff, but I hope that it's clear that I'm also talking about like real life living stuff. Like, you know, when somebody deconverts from MAGA, all of this applies to them. And if your response to them is, well, it's about fucking time, you asshole, right? It's not going to go over well, you know. Okay, and then there's morality, right? How do you address morality? How do you talk about it? How do you deal with it? Reclaiming authentic values. One of the things that happens in cults or happens in extreme groups when people are radicalized is that their values are messed with. The moral foundations over time. You cannot change somebody's moral foundations overnight. It doesn't work that way. It's too basic. But over time, people change. Their reason layer is working 24/7 on making that change happen. So they might come into a group as a 15-year-old thinking, well, I would never, ever hurt somebody because I'm trying to get a product produced before Thursday at 2 o'clock, because that's the cutoff time for the week, right? Thursday 2. And then 3 years later, I find myself pushing this person around, doing things to them I would never have done when I first got in, because that moral layer was changing to a position where, hey, sometimes the ends do justify the means. And over years, you can change that into the ends always justify the means. And people end up becoming the very worst versions of themselves because of that moral manipulation. So distinguishing, reclaiming those authentic values is a bit of moving back in time and seeing who you used to be before all that influence and reconnecting with that version of yourself, basically. I say all that in a nutshell. It's, it's months and years of work, but that's kind of how that works. Distinguishing identity. One of the things that we talk about in the ex-cult world a lot, and this is really important, say, in the MAGA world, is that I mentioned codependency. It's a really important concept in cults because cult members idealize the cult leader. The cult leader is often the most perfect version of humanity to them, even L. Ron Hubbard. So you got to resort that when you come out, because what they want to do is they want to identify with the cult leader and actually start being the cult leader. And they start modeling their own behavior after the behavior of the cult leader. In Scientology, we used to ask ourselves on an almost daily basis when presented with a problem or confusion, well, what would Ron do? The question was not, what should I do right now? The question is, well, what would Ron do? That's what I need to do. And you do that about, 300 times in the course of a couple years, and after a while, you're not you anymore. You're a little mini L. Ron Hubbard. That's identity change. And it's because of these layers being manipulated. So distinguishing your own identity from the cult identity is kind of important after coming out of that situation. A lot of people, I guess I'm getting across, but let me just say this bluntly. A lot of people think coming out of a cult that you're done when you left. And actually, no, you just started. I wish it were different. It'd be awesome if we were, but we're not. Pre-cult personality I talked about, and of course, re-examining your moral conflicts, right? What is it you're conflicted about? What is it that is right and wrong and good and bad? And really reassessing that and taking a good amount of time to do so. It's time well spent. When I've worked with people on this, it has really opened their eyes. Because what happens with cult stuff and with manipulation over time is you become habituated. You form cult habits, action patterns, like ways of responding to things and stuff. There's a lot of ways this is done. Thought-stopping cliches. You tell yourself these little simple things that the cult tells you to say, and that way you don't have to think too much because, Ron's got it taken care of or whatever your cliche is. So stripping yourself of those things is key to this, and re-examining and re-looking at, well, what is right and wrong anyway? What do I think is about these things? Like I said, it's time well spent. So, key takeaways, cults prey on human psychology, absolutely true. And there are a lot more culty groups out there than just religious groups, which I think we're all on the same page on. This model shows how reason, emotion, and morality interact. That's the whole point of it. And the more we know about this and use it, the more protection we can have, and the more secure and safe we can feel in this very, very difficult, unsafe world in dealing with it. Right? That's the whole point of this. So that's my presentation. Fire away with any questions. Okay, let's go from the,
If you could wait for the microphone to come around.
Sorry, wait for the microphone, please.
Oh,
1 second, check.
thank you. Hi, great job, by the way, excellent. I think about you and your story, and you said initially maybe you were, 3 or 4 when your parents, and then 15 more engaged, 18 further engaged, and it just kept escalating.
That's right.
You talked about impact of that pre-cult personality.
Mm-hmm.
My question to you is, what happens to the people that never had a pre-cult personality that were so ingrained? I mean, at 3, you're learning this, right? I mean, formative years. And the example I give you is I have a dear friend of mine that is Muslim, moved here from Saudi, showed up in Iowa, which I cannot imagine. Was not allowed out of her house on the weekends, did all the math problems in the back of her math book in high school because she wasn't allowed to socialize. An arranged marriage, blah, blah, blah. She prays 5 times a day. To this day, she prays 5 times a day. She somehow divorced the man that she was married to. But I think about examples that you give, and I think about, I'm a clinician, and I think about Maslow, and I think she has never been she doesn't have a pre-cult personality.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I was the same way, because, every memory I have has Scientology in it. So I get it. And I have to refer you to identity psychology, right, and maybe some other paths. This pre-cult personality model is something that was developed and used for first-generation cult members. Second-gen cult, in other words, converts as an adult.
Yeah.
It is still a subject of very active study. In fact, I will say we are only at the very beginnings of actual social science research on second-generation cult members. This is only a term that has come up in like the last 10 years in the field. It's barely been looked into. The pre-cult personality model has been around for decades because it was mainly dealing with first gens. Now that the second gen problem is as acknowledged as it is, alternative ways of thinking about or talking about the personality issues with a second gen are being researched. What I can say about it from my own personal experience is I don't talk to second generation members about a pre-cult personality. I talk with, in public, I talk about that because first gen, are pretty common. But when we talk specifically about second gen, you have a whole other pile of problems there, including sorting out, okay, instead of pre-cult personality, let's take a look at what did the cult, what's you? What's the cult, what's you? Right? And maybe you can do that with first gen too, but you kind of have to do that with second gen. It's kind of like, well, what parts of this feel or seem or, within you are you, right? And this takes a lot of work, obviously. But that's kind of my suggestion as to how to approach that. I know I'm talking very broadly in that.
No,
but
it's fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah.
very, very.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll
Here, I'm coming around.
He's coming around.
Hi. I have an anecdote
All
from,
right, lay
from
it on me.
history.
All right.
I'm Hungarian. I was born in Hungary
Ah.
and Jewish,
Ah.
secular. And in Hungary, when Fidesz took over, which is the right-wing party that's ruling now, there was another party that came along called Jobbik. Jobbik stands, when you say Jobbik in Hungarian, it means right, correct.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
All right.
the leader, one of the leaders, was a guy who published and gave lectures on anti-Semitism. They were far right,
Great. Okay.
far right, and he was one of their leaders. And one day, he approached his grandparents and found out his grandparents were Jewish. He didn't know that. They were in the Holocaust. Overnight, now I know the rabbi that did this. Overnight, this guy burnt all his books,
Awesome.
went to an Orthodox synagogue, wanted to learn Hebrew, and went overboard on orthodoxy and moved to Israel. So what this points out is there's a personality that demands certainty. And they get into this cognitive problem where if there's some evidence that they can't refute, then they don't give up the cult behavior and they flip over 180 degrees. Instead of just looking at why they were anti-Semitic and just sort of, he was trained by an Orthodox rabbi, who I know, and so there is that there's some people who have to have a cult, belong to a cult.
Well, let me
Ultra-Orthodoxy is a cult. People are not allowed to leave. They're in groups. And the women are second class, and they can't break out. And there's a penalty, sort of. So I'm just pointing out this other phenomenon where a person requires a cult to belong.
I understand that. Let me throw some things at you. Okay. Did you know this person, or are you familiar with this person pre their whole anti-Semitic thing?
I've read about him.
Okay. Were they like that before they got into the whole anti-Semitic thing?
Before they got it, I didn't know them before he got into his first cult, which
Right.
was the far right cult.
Well,
I didn't know him then.
Well, let me suggest to you
Okay.
that perhaps the cult experience is the thing, and I don't know this individual, obviously,
I
right?
don't
But
personally.
generally speaking, I will assert that you take a fairly average person, you put them into a cult or a cult extreme environment or experience, they become habituated to extremist levels of thinking. Us versus them, black and white thinking. It's very binary thinking.
Certainty.
And that's right. The moral layer is messed with to the point where they know what's true, right? And that's certainty. So the cult works on a person to rile them up, to create that level of certainty. You know, in Scientology is the science of certainty, according to L. Ron Hubbard.
What is Scientology?
It's a religious cult that I was part of.
What do they say they believe in?
We can talk about that later. Here's my point. This person gets into this group in a social environment where extreme thinking is the norm, is expected, is moral. It's the right thing to do, the right way to be. You are not with it. You are off the rails. You are not on the same program as we are if you're not as extreme and certain as we are, right? Now, this person rejects the belief set of this group all of a sudden because of an emotional impact and a moral conflict, right? But what they didn't give up the next day was the habit of being certain.
That's right.
The person didn't need the cult. The cult modified them to get to a place where certainty became a moral need. And they have to hold on to that because it's their habit. They don't know how else to be until they deconstruct the whole thing, right?
Matt,
So,
as an example that is sort of the opposite, you have Steve Miller.
Stephen Miller.
Stephen Miller. He was born Jewish.
Yeah.
His grandparents were in the Holocaust,
Yep.
and so he should have had a moral foundation.
Should have.
Should have.
Should have.
Instead, he flipped it,
He did.
and he's against immigrants
He is.
because they're not human,
According to him.
even
right.
though his grandparents were considered not human.
Exactly. And the moral foundation is so powerful that it's what severs family ties. Right? Why is it that a Scientology mom will disconnect from her kid? Never see him again. A JW will do that to their kids. The kids will do it to the parents. Jobs, businesses will be broken up overnight over religious differences. Why? Moral foundations. Certainty. I know the truth, right? So when a person comes out of that, one of the most difficult and long and really, really involved things, and believe me, I lived through this, right, is figuring that out. Because it's right up on the identity, right? So this is how they see themselves. I'm a good person because I'm this extreme.
What made him go
you
the
know?
other way where he abandoned
Stephen Miller?
Stephen Miller.
I don't know. But if I asked him, if I sat down with him for a few hours, we could probably figure it out. But I don't know. I don't know what his flip is, right? But something flipped him. And just because you grow up in a family doesn't mean you as an individual have to abide by the family rules, right? Many atheists in this group grew up in a religious household, right? So one should not assume that just because the environment is this way, they're going to be that way. And in fact, the interesting question is, well, why aren't you? And I'm a little curious about Stephen Miller's origin story on that, actually. You bring up valid points. I just wanted to reframe what was going on a little bit because I don't want people thinking that there are people who need a cult. The cult makes you feel you need them. And that's kind of the sequence of it. Now, there are individuals, and Stephen Miller may well be one of these individuals, who's just kind of crazy. And there is that. My motto is not about explaining insanity. Okay? And there are people who are born with some screws loose, right? I can't account for everybody with this.
Too much Tylenol.
Yeah, too much Tylenol, that's right. So, Chuck, what you got for
Well,
me?
now you progressed through the cult and you moved up the ladder
At some point, I mean, is the leader of most cults a hypocrite, a liar, that is just up there to count the money that he's getting? And is there some point, though, where there are, let's go to the Catholic Church a minute. Is the Pope just sitting there with his council of whatever, counting his money? But I just don't believe that. I think there are very devout Catholics.
There are.
And are there not very devout Scientologists?
There are. Yes.
That are going up a route, and that, and I get on, like on the Protestant, there's a whole bunch of cult leaders who I think are just doing that, just counting their money. But
Yeah.
there are people that come rising up through the needs that they have, and so it can be difficult to figure out which they are.
It can be. That's exactly right. And that's why I always fall back on context is king. Every individual is an individual. And you got to deal with that person. Jim Jones is not L. Ron Hubbard, is not David Koresh, is not Donald Trump. These are distinct individual human beings. Donald Trump, for example, happens to be one of the purest malignant narcissists I've ever seen. Right? I mean, really, really fits, really leans into it, right? L. Ron Hubbard, turns out, had a whole different thing going on. Probably suffered from a form of epilepsy, actually, called temporal lobe epilepsy, the most common kind. And it causes religious fervor. Right? So everybody's different, even if the behavior is similar or the same from one to the next, you'll find the reasoning underneath the hood quite different. Right? So this effort here is an effort to give some categories to those differences. Okay, what else do we got? Yeah.
I feel I have a better understanding of why facts don't change minds.
Great.
But maybe something we are all concerned about is, can such an understanding lead to any practical methods of addressing the serious, I don't know how to say it, the dangerous, toxic divisions in our society and in our families? Where does it result in any advances in methods of getting through to people?
Yes. Yes, it does. Have you heard of Daryl Davis? Daryl Davis is a black man who has disrobed over 200 KKK members. They have literally given him their KKK robes after conversing with him. He didn't brainwash them or indoctrinate them or open books and teach them things. He sat down and had conversations with them and got to know them one-on-one as a human being. And he leads with, "You don't know me, why do you hate me?" It's an emotional question. It's charged right to the emotional layer, right? Yeah. Why do you hate me? Right? Out comes all this bleh. And then okay, good. Thank you for answering my question. Now let's start dealing with this. But you have to create an environment. He didn't do that in a protest line or outside on the street. He did it in their homes. He sat down, he had dinner with them, right? He sits, it's a conversation that happens in a safe place. Now, they're nervous as hell. If you listen to them talk about it, right, it's not like, oh, we're just getting along and let's go have a beer. These are KKK members, right? Yeah. But he sits down and has this conversation from an honest place where he's honestly, intensely curious where they're coming from. And if somebody feels that you're curious about them, that bypasses so much of the, because they get you really want to understand them. And any individual on MAGA or on the left too has their reasoning, has their reason layer stuff for why they feel that way. But you got to dig into the feelings. What is this? How do you feel about this? What's driving this? And even questions like, well, what converted you? What made you think this was a good thing? Why does Donald Trump know what he's talking about? And really listen to what they say, not listening from, I can't wait to get my facts over to you so that I can refute you. It's a lot of listening. When I do work with cult members, I ain't the one doing a lot of the talking. I sit here and I have to talk because I'm doing a presentation. But when you see me in that situation, I'm asking questions and shutting up. And they're talking to me and telling me. And I know I'm getting somewhere by how much they're telling me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, what comes after this active listening? You're showing curiosity. You're certainly creating an emotional connection.
Yes.
You're giving them empathy.
Yes.
So I assume that at some point that means the empathy is going to be coming back to
It's
you.
kind of organic that it happened that way, unless the person is like really pissed at you or something. But they're not going to share their emotional depth with you if they're really pissed at you. So if you create that space, they start feeling safer to tell you what they really think and feel because you're not going to pounce on them. It's a little bit of this other analogy I've made in the past where people's beliefs, their strongly held beliefs and ideals, are held in a thought fortress in their mind. And it's a prison of belief, right? This was an expression used to describe Scientology. It's a prison of belief. And those words meant a lot to me because it really hit home that that's exactly where I was at and that's what I was in. The thought fortress I created in my mind of the Scientology beliefs was impenetrable. There wasn't any fact you were going to throw at me that was going to get through those walls. But if I could sit down with you in a safe place and I felt you really wanted to know, I'll open the door and I'll let you in. And then we're having an actual conversation where you are able to give me questions that make me think about my positions. Street epistemology is another term for this, and it's really good, right? Because you can start addressing what this person's really thinking and feeling. And if your questions are directed to the emotional and the moral layer rather than the reasoning, you'll be digging into the person, not the ideology. Why does this have so much hold on you? What is it about this that you find so compelling and interesting? Right? This thing you disagree with the person. What is it about this? What connects with you on this thing? Right? Anything that'll draw out the emotional connections and the moral connections. And then you'll find sometimes, most of the time, at least in my experience, that something will pop up that you can actually have a conversation with or about now, and it's safe for the person to do so, so they'll consider it too. Does that make sense? It's hard.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is real easy.
A lot of patience.
It requires that.
Go off the rails. A lot of things could break that.
See, this is the problem when people want to go to the extreme and tackle that, right? I think, I wasn't going to go here, but I would not be trying to engage with deep red hat MAGA right now. Did you know that 50% of this country doesn't vote at all? Yes. They just don't show up. No. Why? Emotional and moral reasoning, right? It's the same thing. They would be a demographic that is not only larger than MAGA, but actually would be easier to talk to and easier to deal with and easier to find when did you give up, man? What happened? Why are you in apathy about our system? Why do you think it all doesn't matter? You know, you could talk to somebody like that far easier than you could engage with somebody who's wearing a red hat. Right? Just throwing that out there. Like I said, I wasn't going to go there, but it just as a target, right? Getting somebody out of a cult is one of the hardest things to do through conversation, and it's never one and done. It's a repeating thing. You got to talk to the person over and over again. A cult intervention isn't one conversation; it's a number of them, and the cult member has to agree to have the conversation, or it doesn't happen. We don't kidnap people anymore, right? Throw them in a van and put them in a hotel room and beat on them, right? We don't do that anymore. That was what they did in the 80s. That doesn't work. This does, but it does require patience, an incredible amount of tolerance, and a care about the person in front of you, right? And I know that that's a big ask sometimes. So I say, don't go find the most extreme red hat and try to tackle them. Make it easier on yourself. Find somebody easier first. You know what I mean? And you'll figure it out as you go, as you're talking to people, what works and what doesn't. Because you kind of have to figure that out for yourself a little bit too, right? There's no script for this. Okay. Okay, cool. What else?
I have it here.
What do we got?
You mentioned moral dilemmas. We used moral dilemmas a lot in the correction system with both juveniles and adults. And
cool.
that really triggered a lot. Do you think moral dilemmas are helpful? On that politics slide, you use a term called unscrewed up, which I wrote down. Do you think that we don't do enough moral dilemmas because we're either too lazy or it's just not part of our repertoire, because moral dilemmas kind of remove a lot of that emotion that you're discussing and gets down to the more nuanced and personalized thinking and why people feel the way they feel? Yeah. And I guess my other question is have we made that process in today's divided society almost impossible to do?
We've made it very hard, right? Because it's popular to be at each other's throats. And when you're and we're in a phase in society right now where people are pretty riled up, and it's not just because of disagreements on an ideological level. There's economic forces and social forces at play too, right? That really kind of sledgehammer on our heads all day long, and that kind of sucks. So realizing that when you're talking with other people, that there's a general situation as well of raised anxiety, you know, and kind of trying to lower the temperature on that a little bit when you're engaging with people would be probably a good idea. I don't know if that makes sense as I put it, but that's what I could say to that. Because, yeah, moral dilemmas are things people don't think about, talk about, deal with much.
I guess,
you know.
You think that might be a good activity for a place like the Hub?
Yeah. Yeah, because here's another thing. Here's another thing I'll throw out on this moral thing. You're going to find in interacting with certain, let's say, some MAGA people or some voter apathetic people or some religious people, you're going to find that actually you share a lot of moral foundations. You have a lot of things in common at that level. You don't want people to get hurt. You don't want to see bloodshed. You don't want this. You don't want that. You know, a good person is a person who doesn't hurt other people, right? You'll find common ground at that level, and you can build on that when you find it. That's maybe another strategy in terms of talking to people is you're not only looking for the things you disagree with or the things that they're not thinking straight about, but also what do we agree on? And if you can build on agreement rather than trying to deal with all the disagreements, you'll be in a much more power position, I guess I would say, in terms of leading the conversation. Because people love it when they find common ground. What? You thought that too? Yeah. Hey, wow. You know, they feel connected. And that's what you want. Okay, what else we got? Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Everyone's questions are so good, I just want to say. I think about the world since 2016 and how alongside this, the pervasiveness of social media and just the speed at which information travels today has been accelerating. And alongside that, people talk about like an epidemic of loneliness and these emotional issues. And I just wondered, when you had the emotion circle up, like, is it too reductive to think about there being a common pattern or common areas where people are like common emotional issues that people are grappling with across the board? Not everyone is going to have like, you know, a story like yours or a traumatic incident or like something big like the Stephen Miller kind of, you know, maybe there was a switch for him. But do you see common patterns of other, I don't know, for the average person, like what is getting them into that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's any society, any culture has its ebbs and flows, its fads, its social ins and outs, right? That can influence behavior or influence how people see or think about themselves. Over the last 20 years, we've had a massively increased awareness of depression, anxiety, ADHD, neurodivergent conditions, right? As a result of that, we see a lot more people talking about that, exhibiting those behaviors openly, right? And trying to and struggling with those things. And those form classes of people, absolutely. So yeah, you can find groups of people that have common ground on emotional frailties or emotional situations. Certainly the young male epidemic, right, the loneliness epidemic or whatever they want to call it, is a great example of that, all right? Because yeah, that's a real problem, and we need to solve it somehow. I'm not an expert on that stuff, so I'm not going to say how to solve it, but I know it's an emotional issue that needs to be solved, right? A lot of young men these days are not. They're just the society is kind of structured as they see it against them, and and what that creates is a hopelessness. And when you take hope from people, it's a very powerful thing to do. It can create very, very negative consequences to remove hope from people. So, does that answer?
Oops, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay.
I just had a quick question. I hadn't been familiar with Gerald Davis at all, and I'm wondering what was the impetus that brought these Klan people in front of him?
He would go to them and ask, "Can we
Go
talk?"
to a Klan meeting?
No, he would contact them individually.
Well, how would he choose?
I think the first one was somebody who lived in his town.
He just walked
Yeah,
up and said,
he just went and met up with them, right?
Okay.
Reached out, "I want to talk, let's have dinner," something. And, I think he was a little surprised that he got in the room. It was a pretty ballsy thing to do,
Yeah,
like go meet your oppressor, right? But he went for it. And he wasn't American raised either. He was raised in France, by the way, which I thought was maybe part of the reason why he could do that a little bit. I don't know. But not that the French corner the market on talking to KKK members. I'm just saying he didn't have an American attitude about it, All right, what do we got? Yeah.
Trying not to make this into like a wishy-washy moral equivalency kind of a thing, but
Sure.
do you have any advice or perspective on kind of taking a step back with maybe the dangers or pitfalls of trying to come into a situation with thinking, how am I going to get somebody out of this cult? Or how am I going to get them to see the light? Because if you really take a step back, you can kind of imagine another group looking at us and thinking oh, well, these secular humanists, atheists, if you can get them in a room and have a conversation with them and get to open up, maybe they can see the light, and maybe they'll go over to this religion or this political party. So I think I'm not trying to make it oh, it's all the same or it's all more, but a more sustainable, healthy kind of perspective and mindset to have about all these kinds of things.
Absolutely. I draw the lines in terms of morality or judgment about that at the point of abuse or lack of informed consent, deception, right? If a person's being actively deceived and living a lie, objectively speaking, you can see that, you have a point of argument. You have a point of launch there, right? If Joe or Sally or Sue aren't hurting anybody and aren't doing anything bad, what do I care about their moral foundations? I couldn't care less, right? There's 8 billion people. I certainly don't have the time to convert every one of them, right? So you pick your targets, you choose your battles. And another thing I'll point out about this, just because I have mentioned here that this is a commitment, in dealing with people of an extreme belief set, you're putting yourself in a position where okay, you're gonna decide to change this person's life. Are you gonna take responsibility for that? Because if you're not willing to, don't do it. Because there's going to be fallout from that. There's going to be consequences to changing somebody's attitudes and changing somebody's mind about something. If I'm not going to go with a person all the way in terms of cult recovery, then I'm not going to sit down and do an intervention with them. Because if I'm just going to dump them as soon as they go, oh, okay, I'm out of here, I haven't really helped them. I've only thrown their life into confusion and upset everything about their life now. And they're not going to have any idea what to do. So it's kind of on me to follow up with them and do something about that. And I think that's what comes to mind for me with your question is pick your battles and decide, is this person somebody you want to invest in, you know? And if not, don't do it. Or just decide, well, I'm only going to do this much. I'm going to challenge one of their beliefs and see where it goes. You know what I mean? Maybe you can hit pay dirt, maybe not. Does that? Yeah? Okay, good. All right, cool. All right, let's do one more and then we'll wrap up. Any last ones, or are we?
Hi.
Okay. Hey.
I guess you kind of already answered my question. My question is, I bet you obviously talk to a lot of people, so when you're just like in a bad mood or just tired and you're trying in your job or whatever you do is trying to, like, it changes lives.
Yeah.
How do you just snap out of it or just try to hide, like, it's not that I don't care, it's just that I'm not in the right headspace to help you, even though we're already here, we're already doing this, we're already just, I can't just abandon you now, so I just have to hide it.
I don't know. I just persist and carry on through. It's duty at that point that drives me. And duty is a thing that drives me. I have that as part of my moral thing, right, for myself. If I agree to do a thing, I really, really, really try as best as I can to pull it off. And if, well, then they won't talk to me. I can't do anything about that. And I'm not going to lose sleep over it either, because I can't control other people. I can do what I can do. And it's taken me a long time to get there, because for a long time I was all about saving the world. I'm going to save you whether you like it or not, right? Now it's not quite like that, right? There's too many people and there's too much to do. Pick your battles, right? And really be determined in your battles, right? Like pick them so that you know you'll follow through. I mean, I don't know. Is that helpful? Yeah. All right. I don't. I need to get some business cards. I should do that. You can look me up on YouTube. Chris Shelton. That's my name. You can contact me that way. Okay. Ask chrisshelton@gmail.com if you want to ask me a question. You can always just ask me there. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Chris.